In 1996, when Rachel Mellon Skemp was 13, she had a sore throat and didn't go to school. When she went missing later that day, she was wrapped in a blanket and pillows. After 26 years, no sign of her has been found, not even the blanket or pillows. But detectives found a disturbing statement in her diary that was written just days before she went missing. It could help them find out who took her. Rachel Mellon came into the world in October 1982. She was from Illinois and lived in Bolingbrook. She went to B.J. Ward Middle School. She was doing great in school, getting great grades and making it onto the honors list, but things at home were much worse. Rachel was hurt by other people for most of her life. Jeff and Amy Skemp broke up when Rachel was a very young child. She was less than 3 years old. By 1985, Amy was seeing someone else, a guy named Vincent Mellon. Vincent offered to take Rachel in and raise her as his own child. Because of this, her last name is now Melon Skemp. Before long, Amy and Vincent had another son and daughter. Jason was born in 1988, and Ashley was born in 1990. Even though the family looked good on the outside, what was going on behind closed doors was much worse than anyone could have thought. Rachel was being raised by her parents in a real house of horrors, where terrible things happened to her all the time. Especially her stepfather, who was supposed to be kind and loving. A monster in the wild. Amy and Vincent had been together for about 5 years before Amy saw the real Vincent. He doesn't look like anything special to people like you and me. He looks like a normal guy, not someone you'd think twice about. Rachel and the rest of her family, on the other hand, couldn't stop thinking about him all day long, mostly because they were scared. They were afraid of how dangerous he could be. Vincent was a ticking time bomb that was about to go off. In 1990, things started to change for the family. Vince and Amy were fighting about who knows what when Vince started to get angrier and angrier as time went on. In a wild rage, which Vince knew all too well, he pushed Amy down the stairs of their home. Amy fell down, but luckily she didn't hurt herself too badly. After she got better, she went right to the police and asked for a restraining order against Vince, which seems to have been granted. But Amy decided soon after that she wanted to make up with Vince, so she dropped the charges against him. I don't know if I would have made the same choice, but that's what she did. But as you might expect, their love didn't last long. Vince quickly ended what could have been a new start by continuing to hurt his family. He is now also paying attention to Rachel. Before long, Vince was back to his old ways and was making threats against Amy and Rachel's lives. In spite of what he told Amy, it seemed like he never really accepted Rachel as his own. He always kept her at a safe remove and used her as a bargaining chip whenever he and Amy had a fight. Rachel had finally had enough by 1995. She ran away from home when she was only 12 years old. She ran until she reached the house of a friend. She never went inside the house, and it doesn't look like she even knocked on the door. She found a safe place outside the house and spent the night there. In the morning, she called her grandparents to ask for help. Her grandparents came and took her home, putting her back in the hands of the cruel person who had been hurting her. Later that summer, Rachel's real father, who now lived in Texas, let her spend a few weeks with him. She asked her uncle to let her move to Dallas while she was in Texas. It doesn't seem like she told him everything that was going on, because if she had, he would have helped her if he knew how bad things were. Unfortunately, no one heard her cries. Rachel was eventually forced to go back home to live with her mother and the monster she called her stepfather, no matter how hard she begged. Rachel started her 7th year of school at B.J. Ward Middle School in the fall of 1995. Rachel was well liked at school, and from the outside, it looked like she had everything. She was a great kid with good grades, a lot of friends, and a smile on her face all the time. Only her closest friends knew about the bad things going on at home, but they were worried about her. Carrie was the girl who was Rachel's best friend. Rachel was always happy and full of life, according to Carrie. Nothing ever seemed to make Rachel sad. Rachel had become interested in recycling and taking care of the earth in the past few months. She also started to try out music and dance. Her life at school and with her friends was getting better, but things at home were about to get worse. In January 1996, a few months later, Carrie found Rachel crying by her locker. Rachel had never done this before, and no one had ever seen the always happy girl cry before. Rachel wouldn't tell her friends what was wrong when they asked. She would only say that she wasn't feeling well and had a problem that she would take care of herself. She closed the door on her friends and refused to answer any more questions. Rachel would never be seen again after this. She never went back to school after that day. The next day, she called in sick with a sore throat, and then she was gone. It was the 31st of January 1996. Rachel and her stepdad Vince were at home after school. Vince had been out of work for a while. This was a very cold winter day, with temperatures around -20 degrees Fahrenheit, strong wind gusts, and snowflakes. Rachel and her stepfather were pretty much stuck because of the snow. Rachel called her grandma around 10:45 a.m. that morning to thank her for the Christmas gifts she had just sent. I can't be sure, but it sounds like she was talking to her maternal grandma or the mother of her mother. This is because, as the call was coming to an end, her grandma, Lucy, noticed that Rachel was getting very quiet. Lucy noticed this and asked, "Is he there?" to ask about Vince. Rachel just said yes, and then a second later, she said she had to go. Vince says that after Rachel got off the phone, she and Vince played Nintendo for a while. Vince says that after an hour, Rachel went to her room to take a nap. She was wearing red shoes and a pink sweatshirt with yellow pants. She got into bed, wrapped herself in a blue blanket, and went to sleep. People say that this was the last time they saw Rachel, but her story only gets more strange and scary from here on out. Vince says that he checked on Rachel around 2:30 p.m. and saw that she was still asleep. From Vince's point of view, the next set of events shows what he told the cops about what happened later that day. Vince says that after he checked on Rachel, he left the house to take the dog for a walk. Remember that it's -20 degrees with strong winds and a lot of snow. He says that even though this was the case, he still walked the dog for 30 minutes before going home. But on the way back home, Duke, their German Shepherd, saw a rabbit running through a field they passed. Vince says that Duke got his collar off and ran after a rabbit. Vince didn't even try to put Duke's leash back on. He just left him there and walked away, leaving him to run off into the unknown. Vince said he thought Duke would make it home later that day, but he didn't. Around 3 o'clock that afternoon, Vince went home. He says he didn't stop to check on Rachel. Instead, he just did his normal things. At 3:15, Rachel's little sister got home from school and noticed right away that Rachel wasn't in her room. Vince didn't care that her sister asked about her. We don't know if he made up a reason or just didn't care, but Vince never tried to find her. A real estate agent drove by the area a few hours later and saw a dog running in a field near the Mellon home. She knew the dog was Duke, so she called him over quickly and took him back to his family. It was between 4:30 and 5 o'clock. Amy, Rachel's mother, and her son Jason came home around the same time. When Rachel went missing, Amy called the cops right away to help look for her. Now you should know that this story is about to get very dark. You guys already know that I won't go into too many gory details, but it will be very clear what this means. When the cops showed up a few hours later, they started their investigation by looking through Rachel's room. It didn't take long for them to figure out that something wasn't right. Together, the clues that had been left behind and the information that Vince gave didn't make sense. The cops knew something was wrong and were determined to find out what it was. The police found several important pieces of proof that showed Rachel had been taken. First, they saw that she had left behind her coat, shoes, wallet, purse, and Sony Walkman. These were things that Rachel always took with her, no matter where she went. Plus, why would Rachel leave her coat and shoes behind on a night when it was -20 degrees? The blue blanket she kept on her bed and 2 of her favorite pillows were also gone. After being worried about the stolen things, they looked at the front door and saw that there were no signs that someone had broken in. Vince said that when he went outside to walk the dog, he didn't lock the door. So if someone got in while he was gone, this would explain why the door wasn't broken. But the inspectors quickly found something very odd. Vince's arms were all scratched up, and some of the marks looked like they hurt. When the police asked him where these marks came from, he said he had been working on a car earlier that day and got scraped and cut while reaching into the engine compartment. I don't see much sense in this information if you ask me. As someone who works on cars most of the time, I'm used to getting a few bumps, scrapes, and bruises. But these small injuries aren't as bad as the cuts and scratches that were said to be on Vince's arms. Police looked very hard in the area, both on the ground and from the air. There was never any sign of her. Police even checked with nearby airports to make sure she hadn't tried to book a flight to Dallas to see her father, but they couldn't find any sign of her. But now things really start to show what kind of person Vince is. If you've been abused, I want to make sure you know that the next part might be upsetting. If that's the case, you might want to skip ahead a bit and just know that Vince had feelings for Rachel that went beyond the fact that she was his stepdaughter. When the police looked in Rachel's room, they quickly found her diary. She wrote in her notebook a lot and wrote about how she felt, what she did, and how she was treated. The police were especially shocked by one page in which she said that her father had hurt her in a number of ways. Rachel said that Vince had come into her room in August of 1995 and started kissing her, among other things. Vince told her in her book that he was doing this so she could learn how predators act so she could stay away from them. But she couldn't get away from her dad. Police also found an old book called Daddy Kisses that talks about father-daughter relationships, for lack of a better word. Worst of all, the cops found a knife under Rachel's pillow, which was a very shocking piece of evidence. I thought of something I wanted to add while I was editing this movie. A viewer named Ashley McCoy said that Drew Peterson, who worked for the Bolingbrook PD, was one of the main detectives on this case. Drew is a man whose past is very sad. He had been married 4 times, and for killing his 3rd wife, he is now in jail. But here's the kicker. His 4th wife disappeared and has never been seen again. All of this is because there are rumors going around online that the agent might have known Rachel's stepdad. Now, I haven't been able to find any proof to back this up, but it's been going around for a while. I don't want to be the one to point the wrong way, but this has very important consequences. A picture of a murderer, Rachel's best friend, Carrie, found out she was missing at 6 p.m. on the night she went missing. Carrie got together a group of her school friends and told them what had happened. Then they all went out to look for her. They looked for their lost friend for more than an hour outside in the freezing cold, but they couldn't find him. They looked for her in all the nearby streets and parks, but she was gone. Carrie says that at this time, all of the friends huddled together and started crying because they knew their friend was really gone, but hopefully not forever. Around this time, Rachel's real father, Jeff Skemp, got a phone call telling him that his daughter had gone missing. Jeff quit his job right away and took the first trip he could to Illinois to help look for her. Even though Jeff wasn't there for much of Rachel's childhood, he was the father she always needed. Nobody else. By the time he got to Amy and Vince's house, it was too late to do much. He went to where Rachel was and laid down on her bed. He took her Walkman, put on the headphones, and hit the play button. Rachel was listening to a song called Hand in My Pocket because it was her favorite. When she spent the summer with her father a few months ago, she told him how much she liked the song. Jeff says that he talked to Vince about what had happened while he was at Rachel's house. Jeff says Vince's only answer was that Rachel must have been taken while he was walking the dog. Vince didn't seem to care much by any means. Jeff has kept the same phone number since that day in 1996, hoping that Rachel will call him someday, but she has never done so. In January 2000, a grand jury was able to get an order to take Vince's DNA. On January 29, the police came to Vince's house and held him for more than 9 hours while they questioned him and took the samples above. During the time they spent talking to Vince, he wouldn't answer many of their questions about where Rachel went. He was finally forced to give samples of his DNA and hair to the police, and an official investigation into him for first-degree murder had started. There were rumors that Rachel might be pregnant and that the baby might belong to Vince. This is why the police started to look into it. Even though Rachel hasn't been found yet, there isn't any hard proof to back up this theory. The entries in Rachel's diary, on the other hand, are very scary, and this is an idea I could get behind pretty easily. Vince also took and failed a lie detector test. Amy was also questioned by the police later, but she had no reason to think Vince was involved. This could have been because she was blinded by her love for him, or because she knew him better than anyone else and knew he wasn't a killer, even though he had his flaws. I don't believe that for a second, if you ask me. Amy also took and passed a test to see if she was telling the truth. After this, though, both Amy and Vince refused to help the cops with their investigation, which was a very surprising turn of events. Amy and Vince both say they don't want to have a funeral for Rachel. The city of Bolingbrook didn't do anything about it until 2002, when they planted a tree and put up a sign in Rachel's honor right across the street from where she used to live. Also, the Bolingbrook police have said in an open and clear way that they have every reason to think that Vince killed his daughter, but they can't charge him until they find her body. Jeff and Carrie are now the most important people in this probe. Amy and Vince have refused to help in any way since 1996, but Jeff and Carrie haven't forgotten, and they keep spreading the word about Rachel's disappearance in the hopes that one day justice will be served and Vince will be arrested, or whoever took Rachel, if Vince is really innocent. The disappearance of Rachel Mellon Skemp is still being looked into by the Bolingbrook cops. If you know anything at all about what happened to Rachel, you should call the Bolingbrook Police Department at 630-226-0600. Wherever Rachel is, I hope and pray that she has finally found the peace she has been looking for so badly.